Somewhere tonight, millions of people will lie down in comfortable beds, in locked houses, in cities with no invading army anywhere near their borders, and they will not sleep. Not because anything is actually happening to them, because their mind will not stop rehearsing everything that could. Now picture a different bedroom, a war camp, no walls, no locked door. A king who has just lost his throne to his own son, fleeing for his life, with an army in pursuit that outnumbers his own. Every rational reason for restlessness that a modern person could name was for this man not a fear. It was his literal circumstance. And yet Scripture records that this exact man, on this exact night, wrote a short 6-verse prayer that ends with a sentence so calm it should be impossible. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Psalm 4:8. Not I will try to sleep, not I will attempt to calm myself down. I will lie down and sleep, simple future tense, a stated fact about what was about to happen next. If you have ever lain awake at an hour when nothing was actually wrong except the noise inside your own head, this 6-verse prayer was written for exactly that condition. And by the time we're finished, you'll understand precisely why it worked.
Most translations title this psalm simply a Psalm of David, but the content and its placement directly after Psalm 3, a psalm explicitly written when he fled from his son Absalom, gives us a specific window into what David was actually facing when he composed it. 2 Samuel 15 records the collapse. Absalom, David's own son, spent years quietly building support, standing at the city gate, intercepting people bringing legal disputes to the king, telling them one by one, "If only I were appointed judge in the land." By the time he made his move, 2 Samuel 15:13 records the devastating report brought to David. The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. David did not stay to fight. He fled, barefoot, weeping, his head covered in grief, crossing the Kidron Valley with a small remnant of loyal men, while his own son prepared to take the throne, the city, and, as 2 Samuel 16 records, even David's own concubines in a deliberate public humiliation. This is the man writing Psalm 4, not a theoretical philosopher constructing advice about anxiety from a place of safety, a father betrayed by his child, a king stripped of his capital, a man whose restlessness, if he had allowed himself to feel it fully, would have been the most reasonable response available to him. And this is precisely why what he does next carries so much weight.
Psalm 4:1. Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. Notice the structure of this opening. David does not begin by convincing God of anything. He does not build an elaborate case for why he deserves rescue. He begins with a memory. The Hebrew behind "give me relief" carries the sense of a space that has already, previously, been widened, a tightness that has already, before this exact crisis, been loosened. David is not approaching God as a stranger, hoping for a first-time favor. He is approaching God the way you approach someone who has already proven repeatedly that they show up. This is the first quiet clue to how this psalm dismantles restlessness. Restlessness often survives because the mind treats every crisis as a completely new question. Will help come this time? Is God actually paying attention now? David's opening line refuses that framing entirely. He is not asking a new question. He is calling on a pattern he has already tested.
Verse 2 turns suddenly toward the people actively making David's situation worse. How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? David was not only fleeing an army, he was fleeing a narrative, a public story being told about him by people who had once served him, now openly participating in his humiliation. This is a specific, recognizable psychological weight, not merely danger, but the added torment of being talked about, judged, mocked, while you're too depleted to defend yourself. And here is where the psalm does something almost nobody expects. David does not spend the next several verses arguing with these voices. He does not construct a defense. Verse 3, Know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Read the pivot carefully. He does not say, "Let me prove to you that my glory is not shameful." He says, "Know this, a settled fact," addressed to the very people mocking him, that his identity was never actually dependent on their current opinion of him. The Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. Past tense, already accomplished. David's restlessness was not primarily a fear about what might happen next. It was a temptation to let other people's narrative define his own sense of who he was. And the cure for that specific temptation was not more evidence. It was memory. The same remembered pattern from verse 1, now applied to identity itself.
Psalm 4:4 contains one of the most misunderstood instructions in the entire Psalter. Tremble and do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Some translations render the opening word, be angry. The Hebrew is ragaz, a word describing genuine internal agitation, trembling, disturbance, not calm composure, not spiritual bypassing, not the pretense of peace laid over unprocessed feeling. This is critical because it means David is not instructing himself, or anyone reading this psalm, to suppress the very real distress of being betrayed by a child, losing a throne, and hearing an entire city mock his downfall.
When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Not distract yourself, not force positive thoughts. Search. The Hebrew here carries the sense of speaking within oneself, examining, turning something over, an active, honest internal reckoning with what is actually happening inside you, followed by silence, the same root used elsewhere to describe waters becoming still, a storm settling. This is not suppression. It is the specific sequence required for genuine calm to arrive. Feel it honestly, examine it fully, and only then let it settle. And notice, Paul, writing centuries later in Ephesians 4:26, echoes this exact structure almost word for word. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. The same permission, the same warning, the same insistence that unprocessed, suppressed emotion left to fester overnight becomes the actual danger, not the emotion itself.
Psalm 4:5. Offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord. In David's world, this would have carried an immediate, specific resonance. Sacrifice was not abstract. It was blood, smoke, ritual precision, an entire system built around the assumption that approaching God required doing something correctly. But notice what David pairs with the instruction to sacrifice, and trust in the Lord. Not perform the ritual correctly and hope it works. The sacrifice, rightly offered, was never meant to be a mechanical transaction. It was meant to be an outward expression of an inward posture, and without the trust, the ritual alone was empty performance. This is the same danger Malachi would name centuries later, priests going through motions without conviction behind them. And it is the same danger restlessness often produces in a modern life, performing the actions of peace, the breathing exercises, the routines, the things you're supposed to do to calm down, without the actual trust that would make any of it more than performance.
Psalm 4:6. Many, Lord, are asking, who will bring us prosperity? Let the light of your face shine on us. Many are asking. This is not David's own question. It's the ambient anxiety of everyone around him, the specific, exhausted cynicism of people who have stopped expecting things to actually get better, reduced to a defeated question with no addressee, no expectation of an actual answer. Who will bring us prosperity? And David's response is not to answer their question. It's to redirect the entire posture of the prayer itself. Let the light of your face shine on us. This is not incidental language. It's a direct echo of the ancient priestly blessing, Numbers 6:24-26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. David, in the middle of exile, betrayal, and public humiliation, reaches, not for a demand,
not for a specific outcome, but for the oldest blessing his people had ever known, trading the crowd's anxious, unanswerable question for a specific, ancient request addressed to someone who actually listens. The restless mind keeps asking questions nobody is positioned to answer. David's prayer redirects the asking itself to the only one who was ever going to.
Psalm 4:7. Fill my heart with joy when their grain and new wine abound. This verse requires you to understand what grain and wine actually represented to an agricultural society entirely dependent on harvest. Abundant grain and wine meant survival, security, the tangible, visible evidence that everything was going to be fine for another year. It was the ancient equivalent of financial security, career stability, a full bank account. The material markers modern minds instinctively reach for as proof that anxiety can finally stand down. And David, who had none of that, who had lost his kingdom, his capital, his sense of physical safety, says his joy exceeds even that abundance. Not because he has convinced himself material security doesn't matter, because he has located his joy in something that doesn't depend on the harvest at all. This is the exact reversal that restlessness cannot survive. Restlessness thrives on the belief that peace is downstream of circumstances finally aligning, the diagnosis clearing, the finances stabilizing, the relationship resolving. David's joy in verse 7 is not waiting for any of that. It has already arrived, in the middle of exactly the circumstances that should have made it impossible.
We arrive, finally, at the verse that started this entire investigation. Psalm 4:8. In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Every element of David's actual circumstance argued against this sentence. His son controlled the capital. His own advisor, Ahithophel, had defected to Absalom's side and was actively counseling how best to destroy him. 2 Samuel 17 records Ahithophel's specific advice: strike David that very night, while he is weary and weak-handed, and finish the rebellion in a single decisive blow. David did not know, in the moment he wrote this psalm, whether that counsel would be followed. He was, by every rational measure, in more danger on this particular night than at almost any other point in his entire life. And he writes, I will lie down and sleep.
The Hebrew word for the safety he describes is batach, not the absence of threat, but a specific, settled confidence, a trust so structurally sound that the body itself can finally stop bracing. Notice the final phrase carefully. You alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. You alone. Not my remaining soldiers, not the terrain I've chosen to camp on, not any strategic advantage David could point to. The safety was not circumstantial. It was relational, located entirely in the character of the God David had already tested, in verse 1, as someone who reliably answers. This is why the psalm ends here, and not with a resolution to the actual crisis. Absalom's rebellion was not yet over when David wrote this. The danger had not passed, but the restlessness had. Because restlessness and danger, this psalm insists, were never actually the same thing. If you came to this video hoping for a technique, a specific breathing exercise, a phrase to repeat, a formula that guarantees your mind will finally go quiet, Psalm 4 does not give you that. It gives you something slower, and in the end, far more durable. It gives you a God who has already answered before, worth remembering before you ask again. An identity that was never actually in the hands of the people narrating your downfall. Permission to feel the trembling honestly, followed by the discipline of searching it fully before letting it settle. A trust that outweighs performance. A prayer that redirects the anxious, unanswerable question toward the only one who is ever going to respond. A joy located somewhere deeper than the harvest. And finally, only after all of that, a sleep that does not wait for the danger to pass, because it was never actually the dangerous decision to make. David's rebellion did not end that night. It would take a battle, his son's death, and weeks of grief before the crisis fully resolved. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, on one specific evening, a father who had lost almost everything lay down. and slept. Not because the threat was gone, because he had finally located his safety somewhere the threat could never actually reach.